At the western edge of the broad Pacific lies a crescent-shaped chain of islands which form the boundary between the Pacific Ocean and the Philippine Sea. Discovered by Magellan in 1521, the Marianas, with the exception of Guam, have today become a commonwealth of the United States. It was partly the prospect of this stable political environment which led the Far East Broadcasting Company to establish a base of operations on Saipan in late 1975. Lying 15 degrees north of the equator, this gem of tropical greenery measures about 14 miles in length by from 3 to 5 miles in width. Spectacular coral reefs provide quiet lagoons along the western beaches of the island, and temperatures in this tropical climate average 75 to 85 degrees year-around. Initially leasing this land at the northern end of the island on which to establish a shortwave and medium-wave station, months of effort were expended clearing the site and erecting a transmitter building. Just as the shell of the building neared completion, however, we were dismayed when, without warning, our lease was terminated and we were forced to abandon this location. Today, the tangan, a small, fast-growing tropical tree, has reclaimed the area, and our building is hidden by its growth from more than a few yards away. Search was begun for an alternate site, and a lease was signed for property on Capitol Hill near this abandoned Japanese communications building. Since this property was not large enough to include the transmitter and tower for our medium-wave station, KSAI, a third site was leased on some swampy ground near the village of Tanapag for this purpose. Just as the land was cleared, however, the local villagers organized a protest demonstration, and again our progress came to a halt. Meanwhile, at the Capitol Hill property, where the shortwave station was to be built, a housing development on land directly in front of ours forced us to abandon this site also. A fourth location, this time for KSAI's transmitter, was also lost because of an endangered species of mallard duck. Over 3.5 years of effort, and really not much to show for it. Were we discouraged? Well, would you be? It was at this time, in September 1979, that Rose and I joined the staff on Saipan as the search continued for suitable property for transmitter sites. My initiation into missionary service involved many hours of tramping through the boonies with Norman Blake. By December, we had located an almost ideal spot for our shortwave station, a flat, grassy area atop a 400-foot cliff overlooking the Philippine Sea. As we explored the property, I remember standing with Ted Haney, our executive director, at the edge of the cliff and holding an impromptu prayer meeting, claiming the land for the Lord. God has honored those prayers, and today the project is rapidly nearing completion. Unknowingly, almost centering the site in this beautiful scene, Bert Brunemeyer had earlier taken this picture, which was featured on last year's FEBC calendar. By May of 1980, the lease was ours, and planning had begun in earnest. Surveyors located the perimeter of the property, and a crew was set gathering the live ordnance profusely scattered over the area during the Second World War. A U.S. Navy demolition team came to dispose of our finds. Typhoon Dinah paid us a visit in November of 1980, destroying houses, damaging boats, downing power lines and trees, and demolishing this warehouse containing the crates of transmitters, towers, and equipment we had shipped to the island. But again, God's care was evident, for just days before, the owners of the warehouse had requested that we move our goods further inside to allow them room at the front of the building. And this was the most severely damaged part. Steel girders crashed down, damaging or destroying about a dozen new Honda automobiles. Our goods came through almost unscathed, except for a good soaking. As soon as another warehouse could be located, our boxes were under roof once more. However, we were soon forced to move again, and then again as various warehouses required the space. Finally, every alternative was exhausted, and just weeks before we had a roof ready to receive the lot, our crates were stacked in rows out in the field on our Marpy property. Some wag put up this sign, calling it the FEBC Typhoon-Proof Warehouse. After all, how can the roof blow away when there's only blue sky above? In the spring of '81, clearing was begun on the property, and it quickly became evident that not all the munitions had been removed. Even today, every mowing reveals a few more pieces. These are periodically removed and destroyed by demolition teams. We stopped counting at about 6,000 pieces. After we had cleared and graded the land, we began topping our access roads and building foundation pads with crushed coral, and by late spring, work was begun on the first staff house. Volunteers have played a significant part in the construction of the project, beginning with Gerald Erickson, who gave 2.5 years of his time and helped in many phases of the work. Volunteers Roy Hinger and Jim Epperly arrived and joined in also, laboring hard and long to install plumbing and electrical lines and supervise the work. Because of the strong radio frequency fields that will be present, all the reinforcing steel was bonded together by arc welding. A local contractor was engaged to erect the shell of the house, and by the fall of '81, the roof was poured and the shell was complete. Meanwhile, the lush tropical growth began to repossess the property, and it became necessary to take other measures. After mowing, a hand seeder was used to sow grass seed, which has helped to choke out the undesirable plants. In January of '82, floors were poured for the second and third houses, as well as the transmitter building, in preparation for the arrival in mid-February of 13 stateside volunteers whose 3.5 weeks of whirlwind effort saw tower bases and anchors poured, house walls up, cabinets built, plus a good start on the transmitter building itself. They had just about decided they couldn't push the cement mixer up the hill when the menacing tractor came along and changed their minds. John Yak Legion organized and headed this group. A new, shorter road to accommodate the power line was built, eliminating over 1 mile of length and many thousands of dollars cost to FEBC. In early summer '82, the Walthers from Australia arrived, and Fred, contractor turned missionary, added his labors to the construction gang. Also during this time, the tower sections were assembled and painting begun by another volunteer, Sandy Morton, from Mount Hermon, California. You can get some idea of the natural beauty of the site from this view. By September, the shell of the transmitter building was completed so that the equipment which had endured so much could finally be moved in out of the elements. Since water lines do not run to this part of the island, a large cistern was constructed to catch rainwater from all the roofs. This tank stores about 50,000 gallons. The 100-kilowatt former VOA transmitter, brought from Okinawa, stands in place, and Bert Brunemeyer and Norman Blake began the job of repairing the ravages of time. A fresh coat of paint has given it a new lease on life. Work was pushed toward completion on 2 of the staff houses, and the Bob Springers, who arrived in December, were soon able to move into the second house, joining the Blakes in the first, and giving us 2 families living at the site. Now the third house has been completed and is being occupied by Bob and Lois Reynolds from the Home Office and Jack Lentz from Korea. Bob has taken the responsibility of field director, and he and Jack are helping ready the station for operation. These large transformers and other switching equipment occupy the power vault behind the transmitter itself. How do you like the size of these fuses? Shelves and cabinets have brought order to the thousands of spare parts and tubes in this storage room. Many holes have been chiseled out of the limestone underlying our property for the concrete anchors which hold the massive antenna curtains in place. Our medium wave broadcast station, KSAI, since its inception in April 1978, has operated with a temporary 1 kilowatt transmitter and for an antenna a wire strung from trees. This limits our audience primarily to those on Saipan and nearby Tinian. Our small staff consists of Doug Campbell in the news department, Stan Greer, program director, Angie Brunemeyer, music librarian, Rose as bookkeeper, myself in engineering and as station manager. Roy Alvarez has acted as production coordinator. But life isn't all work, and here Roy prepares for a bit of his favorite avocation. Also on our local staff are Erna Capileo, who capably handles so many tasks around the station, Tony Titano, taking some of the evening shifts, and Felix Sakisit, who, along with other duties, produces our very popular request program on Saturday afternoons. And soon the temporary 1 kilowatt transmitter will be retired, as 10,000 watts gives new impetus to our signals from this choice location at the former Coast Guard Loran station, with our new tower out of the crates and poking skyward to replace the shorter one you see here. Soon also the first shortwave unit will commence programming from our strategically located island with a vast potential for reaching the peoples of the Far East. The gods that men make stand empty-handed, with nothing of eternal value to offer, while above looms the cross of Christ with its message of joyous hope, which we bring to those who have never before heard.